Welcome to Waters Garden Center. My name is Michelle and this is Doug. I'm going to be teaching the class. I'm going to ask for forgiveness right now. I've been fighting a cold and I'm almost over it, and I can actually talk today, which is a great thing. But Doug and I are kind of tag team this anyway, so we'll get through it.
So the premise of the class is that most of us learn to garden somewhere else, most likely. And we move here and we're all ready to go to garden, and things are different. There are a number of things that are different about gardening here. So the idea is might as well learn about these things beforehand rather than through trial and error. So we're going to cover a lot of what makes gardening different here, a challenge at times. We're going to talk about best practices, products that we have, and then of course we'll take your questions about whatever related to gardening. And also, if you're interested afterwards, after the class is done in about an hour or so, we usually spend some time trying to answer questions individually. Plus, Michelle and I can take you around if you like, and kind of show you new plants. You can see there's since I was here just last week, a whole lot more has arrived. And we have a whole load of fruit trees in the parking lot behind us here, and you're certainly welcome to take a look at those and get some if you want to. Just be aware that it's kind of a muddy parking lot back there and it's a mess. We haven't gotten everything unloaded and put into place, but it's available, and this time of year is a good time to plant as long as the ground is not frozen. And so that's kind of an overview. So let's start talking about what's different here. As you may have noticed, in this area, unlike some places like California, we actually have 4 distinct seasons. And so that means that we still have, kind of long growing season, and we have summer gardening that you can do, winter gardening, but 4 distinct seasons. And temperatures, there's quite a range of temperatures, especially nighttime and daytime temperatures can vary quite a lot. That can have an effect on plants. Another factor, of course, is altitude. Most of us live at least 5,000, 5,400 square feet. That has an effect on the plants that you grow. That has an effect on the climate as well. And the other thing, of course, is low humidity. We have times of the year, especially May and June, we can have hot, dry winds, very low humidity. Plants don't like that, especially new plants. I always think about the basil that I would plant in June. And by the way, when we start getting summer vegetables in, tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, basil, that sort of thing, you don't want to plant them until after Mother's Day. For me, that usually meant I would wait till the beginning of June, just because all of those summer vegetables, they want low temperature, low nighttime temperature, the highest at night, to be around 50 degrees. So we're quite a ways away from that, and we will be even in April when all of us gardeners get really impatient and we have a beautiful day, we want to plant tomatoes, then it gets cold and they die. So that happens. But then, after it warms up a bit, and it's warm at night as well, so you plant your vegetables. And back to the basil that I think about, May and June, especially June, you get the hot, dry, these prevailing southwesterly winds, almost single-digit humidity. It's really low humidity. And I would just water the basil every day and keep looking at it and thinking, okay, come on now, anytime you can start growing. And it wouldn't do much. It would sort of handle itself okay. And then the monsoons would come, and all of a sudden, it would just really thrive. So a lot of these summer vegetables are essentially tropical plants. So they love the humidity. They want the humidity. We can water our plants every day. We can flood them practically, but we can't give them humidity out in our yard. And so, soils. Now, depending on where you live, if you have soil, congratulations. In my yard, it's a lot of rock. You know, when the yard was landscaped, they did amend soil and put in some soil. And so I don't try to plant in new places because I've just grown weary of digging and hitting a lot of rock and so on. But for most of us, you know, you may have a sandy, decomposed granite type soil. If you live in Prescott Valley, Granville, that area, you may have a heavy clay soil. Clay soils are notorious for draining poorly, so that means that you may have a plant that doesn't look like it's doing very well, so you water it more, and the problem is that you have poor drainage because of the clay soil. You're compounding the problem. Other properties, you know, have got mostly rock. So this is kind of a challenge, and most of our soils are also really high on the pH scale. They're very alkaline. Ideally, plants like, you know, kind of a balanced pH is what we call it. So adding mulch, adding soil sulfur can help to increase the acidity and get your soil to be more balanced. And so people say, well, I want to get a soil test. And we say, well, you don't need to. I can just tell you, you're going to have high alkaline soil. So, I mean, you can get the soil test if you like, but most likely that's what's going on. If you have high acid, it means that somebody has been working on that soil, adding to the acidity. So, and some plants that we grow here, like I see some rhododendrons over there, camellias, azaleas, hydrangeas, they want to be in more of an acidic soil. Blueberries are a good example. People sometimes just give up on planting blueberries in the soil here. They put them in big pots. It's easier to control the soil. All of those plants that I just mentioned, they want to have a more acidic soil. So
the best way to, when we go out to plant, we definitely recommend that you amend your soil. So we do 2/3 natural soil because your plants have to get used to living wherever you are. And then 1/3 of our premium mulch, which is a compost. It's not that big barky mulch. It's actually a compost that you use for planting. So when we dig a hole, we're going to go twice as wide, just as deep as the pot that you're planting. So if I was planting this, I'd only need to go at 8 or 10 inches that this is. Twice as wide, so you're going to dig a wide hole. Mix the mulch with your soil and then backfill what you have. If you are in Granville, like Doug said, you might want to go just a little bit higher on that mulch because the mulch will actually break up that clay. And that's the purpose of it. If you have a really rocky area, that's going to help add that moisture content. So the mulch will work in all your different areas and help your plants survive.
we oftentimes recommend something that's called the perk test. If you think for any reason maybe you've got an issue with drainage or you're not sure about the soil, what you can do is before you plant anything, you can dig a hole, about as wide as you think you're going to use for, especially the tree, and dig the hole and then fill it up with water. And if it's still there the next day, then that's probably not a good place to plant. And so you may just need to look for a place somewhere else, and it doesn't have to be that far away. I mean, you can have a little pocket of clay right here, and then you can have reasonably good soil relatively nearby in the garden. This is my sister-in-law in Granville, same sort of thing. She has trees and shrubs that are thriving. She has one spot that's, kind of a big deposit of clay, and she keeps coming back here and asking me what should she plant there. And after going to check it out, I said, Sue, the best thing for this spot right here is a boulder. Forget about trying to plant anything here because there's no drainage, basically. So very few plants like to live in a soggy hole with no drainage. So we talked a little bit about climate, the fluctuations, late frost. You can get frost as late as May. I mean, last year I had divided my irises and I fertilized them, took care of them, and I went away on a trip overseas. I came home, irises looked beautiful. This was late April. They were just in full bloom. 2 weeks later, we had a 45-minute hailstorm, and every single flower was gone. So all that work that I had done the previous year, that happens. The plants are okay, and I trust they're going to flower again this year. But it was a very short period of time. At least the hail waited till I came back home and saw, wow, look at those irises. They look really nice. All that hard work paid off. And then that day, as I heard the hail on the roof and looked out the window, goodbye, irises. So we can have these late storms and late cold weather, and it's just something that we have to learn to know about, learn to live with, how to deal with it, and so on. So fluctuations in temperature, low humidity, early and late storms. On the other hand, you can have, for example, tomatoes, the sweet 100 tomatoes, those do pretty well in my yard. I remember one year I still had a lot of tomatoes, some red, some green, at almost the beginning of November. And it had been a pretty mild fall. Fall's a good climate here. It's not too windy. Nights are cooling off, days are mild, it's still beautiful. Sometimes the air quality isn't great because of all the prescribed burns they do, but for your vegetable garden, it's usually a pretty good time of year. And so here was beginning of November, and I just went ahead and picked all the tomatoes that were there, and within a couple of days we had a frost. So usually most of the summer vegetables will die back when it gets really cold at night. And that could be whenever. It could be late October, early November.
So for vegetable gardens, we have a couple of different seasons. So the cool season crops will start coming in probably towards the end of February, which is your lettuces, your spinach, cabbage, broccoli, all that type of thing. Tomatoes, actually, we have some coming in late March. Like Doug just said, tropicals don't do really well. But if you have a greenhouse or a nice sunny window, you can actually get them started a little early. Just know that you're going to have to protect them from the elements. Also, we have a fall season starting in August. So you can go back to those lettuces, your radishes, and that type of thing. So you can get those two seasons for the cool crops. Lettuce doesn't do well in the hot summer. It's just going to wilt or bolt either way. But we do have a nice long tropical season for your cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, and that type of thing.
And the cool season crops can be really nice and can be productive also. Bok choy, chard, Swiss chard, broccoli. I like growing, we usually have a red leaf romaine lettuce. It's really nice. And this last fall, I put that in a big pot up on my deck because I didn't want to put it out in the backyard because the javelina, that was sort of a throughway for the javelina. So I'm growing this really nice red leaf lettuce. And all of a sudden, my cat decides this is a good place for him to lie down and take a nap, which wasn't that good for the lettuce. So I'm talking to my cat saying, see these beds right here where I have cat grass growing for you? I've dedicated 2 boxes of cat grass, and you eat that every day, and now you decide you have to come into my lettuce. But, that's life with animals in the household. But let's talk about animals, because animals are another part of gardening here, as we all know. So we have javelina, deer, we have gophers, we have rabbits, we have pack rats. If you're really unfortunate, you may have many of those all together. And my sympathies go out to you. I have my garden seems to be an ancient travel area for javelina. So it can be the whole clan, these great big adults and little babies. And I noticed that they can jump up really easily, about this high, from my neighbor's yard up to mine. And sometimes, I have planted a lot of plants that they usually don't like. But sometimes they have to dig them up to discover that they don't like them. And the other thing is, about animal maintenance. What do you do? What strategies do you use aside from fencing in your entire yard? Or Some folks like to put in electric fences, maybe around their roses or their vegetable garden. And usually it only takes 1 or 2 visits for an animal to get a little shock and they'll stay away. But my neighbor is a real bird lover, and so they have all this bird seed in containers on poles. Well, the javelina have figured that out also, and what they do is they come and they bang into with their hips, and the seeds shower down, and everybody, including little babies, get a meal, and then they hop up to the next level and say, let's see what's happening in Doug's yard. That's probably the good stuff. We've had these little hors d'oeuvres down here. Seeds are good. And so what we usually recommend to folks is when you're thinking about gardening, think in terms of plants, shrubs, and so on that these animals are less likely to eat. And those are mostly anything that's herbal. So that means lavender, rosemary, sage, basil, the oregano. Yeah, most herbs they'll stay away from. Some shrubs they'll stay away from. Some they love. We have a list for plants that deer and rabbits tend not to like, and then another one for javelina tend not to like. It would be nice if they all, correlated. It doesn't always work that way, and it doesn't always work that the animals abide by these lists by any means. We found that it's been a difficulty. We're working on that, but it hasn't always worked. But in general, you'll find plants. And fortunately, when my yard was landscaped many years ago, the landscaper had this in mind, and he put in Russian sage and autumn sage and butterfly bush and potentilla. And so there are plants there that they, over the years, have stayed away from. And sometimes they change their minds, and when things are really, food is scarce, they may go after something that they normally would not pay any attention to. But it's just kind of an ongoing struggle. You have to learn what's going on in your yard, and if you can have certain things fenced in, that's great. We have wonderful roses here in April. They're beautiful, but deer love the flowers. So there are all kinds of beautiful plants. And I don't know how many times people have come in and said, "Oh, I planted all these plants. They were doing so well. Came out in the morning, they were eaten down to the ground." So it can be discouraging. And the underground plant eaters, the gophers and the moles, they can be a problem as well. Several years ago, I had a wonderful crop of red potatoes, and the day before I discovered that they were ripe, the gophers discovered that as well, and they ate most of them. There were a few volunteers left, but it was pretty discouraging, and I didn't even know there were gophers there. And we have a whole other class in animals and gophers. We have all kinds of products for the gophers, things that you can do to deal with them. Believe me, they can be a problem, and it's just something that you have to learn to deal with. Animals in the garden place. So, and we have other classes as well on aphids and bugs and so on. So I don't mean to be, very, very bad news here, but it's important to know be realistic, but know that gardening can be very successful here. We've got lots of days of sunshine, beautiful mild climate, a lot of things can grow. You just have to learn what will do well and what won't. A lot of folks come in here and say, I grew roses with Grandma. She taught me how to grow them when we lived in Missouri, and everything was wonderful. And you can grow roses here. They do really well. But people actually come in and they ask, well, do you have eucalyptus trees? So where do you think they come from? No, we have no eucalyptus trees. They will die in the wintertime. And by the way, we always make a big joke here of people, where are you from? Midwest, Northwest. And then you say California, and people are sort of reluctant, Yeah, I'm from California. And so finally I say, look, I moved here from California myself 11 years ago and never looked back. I love it here. And so there's really no shame. Nobody's going to judge you. It's okay if you're from California. Just understand that it's not like a San Diego growing climate. It's not the Central Valley. No citrus. Citrus will not grow here outdoors. You can grow them outside in summertime, but in wintertime they better come indoors, because as soon as it gets freezing, they're just not going to survive.
Just a little side note on that is, if you did bring your succulents and cactus and all that stuff from California, hopefully you didn't leave it outside, because most of it's probably toast. But we do have succulents, cactus that do grow well here. So just be careful with that. If you're working on moving, just know that some of it you'll have to bring in the wintertime.
When I moved here, I brought a huge jade plant. It was in a giant pot. The mover left it behind. He thought it was too heavy to put in his truck, and I guess they don't take live plants. So it went in my truck. I drove it down here, my dog, my truck, my beautiful jade plant. We got here around the middle of November, and I put this plant out in the front porch. I was so proud of it. By December, the jade plant looked like sauteed onions. We had some cold weather, and that was all it took. It just would not survive outdoors. But we have down below, we've got all kinds of indoor house plants, cactus, jade plants, and we can also counsel you about what cactus will do well here. Prickly pear will grow almost anywhere. Cold weather doesn't bother it, yucca and some of the others, but not ocotillo and other cactus. So what else, Michelle? What else?
So just real quick, we are in a zone 7. So when you look at tags, be aware that we are zone 7. If anybody's down towards Mayor, that way, you're probably closer to an 8. But we are a complete 7 here. So when you're looking for the tags, the lower the number, the more cold tolerant it is, which is usually a good thing. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at tags. The other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at tags is they make tags for the entire country. We are a mile high, so we have intense sunshine that just blazes a lot of stuff. So a lot of things that used to grow in the full sunshine in California, Oregon, the West Coast of Washington, you'll probably need some afternoon shade for that stuff. Shade for that. Maples, Japanese maples will do well here, but they do need that protection. Our southwest prevailing winds will dry them out that fast. So be careful when you go to plant. If you're not sure, ask one of us and we'll help you with your decision making. One of the most biggest questions I get is when can I plant? Which is the great thing about living here is there's no bad time to plant except for maybe in June. You still can, it just gets touchy with your watering, trying to keep the plants surviving with transplant shock. The heat, the winds that just suck the air or moisture out of everything. But now's a great time to plant. Fruit trees, great time to get them in before they bud out. You don't get any transplant shock, that way they bloom in your yard. They will fruit in your yard and you won't have all of that transplant. They'll get in the ground and ready to go. Evergreens, now is a great time to get those in because they have about 4 months before the heat comes on to get some roots established.
So what Michelle's talking about is cold hardiness, and all of our trees and all of our evergreens, conifers and so on, they have plenty of cold hardiness for the climate here. And you can look at the tags, you talked about zones, if you're curious about that. I mean, some plants will say they can tolerate, minus 10, minus 20 degrees. Let's hope we never get that low around here. It's pretty cold already as far as I'm concerned. But fruit trees, for example, the trees that we grow, that grow well here, and those are the trees that we carry, apples, cherries, peaches, nectarines, apricots, and so on. They want it to be cold in the wintertime. When they're in dormant season, they like to have so many hours of cold weather. That's, you may see on the tag, 400 hours. You wonder, what does that mean? That's called the chilling hours, and it usually means that trees like to have that number of hours of weather lower than 40 degrees during the wintertime. That helps them after to come out of the dormancy in the springtime and grow fruit. So the fruit trees, if you're interested, as I mentioned back there, we have a lot. One of the things to consider about fruit trees is many of them need a pollinating partner. Some don't. Not too many peaches do, a lot of apples do. So that means if you're growing, you decide you want a Granny Smith apple, you might need to pick a Fuji to go with it. I'm not sure if those two will blend. We have grids that you can look at. So in many cases, two fruit trees of different species will be what you need for them to pollinate properly, unless you have other fruit trees that will work with each other already in your yard.
Watering. Let's talk a little bit about watering. One of the things that new gardeners need, new folks that have just moved in need to know is you really need to pay attention to your sprinkler system. Know how many gallons are coming out on each spaghetti tube. This is really, really important stuff. Coming in and telling us that you have a drip system isn't going to help us at all. Knowing how much water is actually going on to that plant will be helpful. So learn your system so you know exactly how much water you're getting to that plant. Most trees and shrubs only need to be watered in the heat of the summer a couple of times a week. You don't need to water every day. If you're watering for 15 minutes, it's not doing any good. All you're doing is keeping that top soil wet so it can dry out fast. You want to water less often so your roots will seek water and seek that dampness. You want deep, healthy roots. If you're watering a lot, often but not very deep, you're going to have that shallow root system and you're going to lose plants faster. So it's really important to know how your sprinkler system's working.
An example of that is last summer, this gentleman came in and he had a picture, of his spruce tree. He said, the needles are turning brown. It looks really unhealthy. I don't know what's going on with my fruit tree, my spruce tree, my blue spruce, because I water it every day for 5 minutes. 5 minutes every day. I stand there with a hose in this tree, the needles will turn brown. So I tried to politely say, that's the problem right there. Instead of 5 minutes every day, which you shouldn't do for any tree, because all it does is get the surface wet and it's soggy all the time. It doesn't get down to the roots. Why don't you try once every 10 days for an hour and a half? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, believe me, spruce trees, they're susceptible to too much water, not enough water. But 5 minutes every day is not really going to work for anything. So what Michelle is saying really is that we can't tell you, see that tree right there, it needs exactly this much water, this many days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and so on. Unfortunately, there are way too many variables from the climate, the microclimate you're in, the soil, the weather. We have literature, we have rules of thumb about watering, but as Michelle said, you need to understand how much water is being emitted out of it if you've got a drip system. A lot of times, we'll move into a house. Well, yeah, there's a drip system. All you got to do is flip the switch and turn it on. It may or may not be the right amount of water. The emitters might not be working. I usually check my emitters every springtime. I turn them on, just let them run, just go and check every one. There's usually something one that needs to be repaired. It's better to figure it out in the springtime than in the middle of June. It's hot and the plant looks to be fading. It might be too late. So, on the Waters website, there's lots of literature to cover some of these subjects we're talking about, little single-page sheets you can print and take a look at. There's one on watering, about the depth and so on. Ideally, when you plant a tree, and it's, say, a 5-gallon tree that's this deep, that's how far you want the water to go. Well, how do you know about that? You have to use a probe, like a metal probe. And if the probe just sort of stops going after a while, then you know that that's as far as the water has worked its way into the soil. Can we talk about some products here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we have pests and diseases just like everything else. We recommend that you have a couple of things in your arsenal to get started. I'm going to touch base on this real quick. This is a pre-emergent for weeds. A lot of us have DG, and then we have the weeds that start popping up. Pre-emergent basically keeps those seeds from germinating, so you won't have that. If you're going to put this down, you want to put it down soon because with our temperatures being in the 60s next week, you'll start seeing those weeds coming out really, really fast. This is a granular product you put down with a spreader, or you can sprinkle it out if you have a smaller area. But you need to water it in because that creates that base. If you're too late for your pre-emergent, this is actually a pre and a post-emergent. So the nice thing about this is that it'll keep those seeds from germinating that haven't yet. But if you have them, this will actually take care of the seeds or the weeds that are actually growing. This says for lawns. Since most of us don't have lawns, this will still work in your DG and your areas.
I've been using the pre-emergent, the red and yellow package that Michelle showed. I've been using it for quite a few years, and I just do it once a year in February, just broadcast it, watered it in really well, and it's done a good job of keeping the weeds from popping up. Now this won't do anything for the most part for any weeds that are existing weeds. This pre-emergent, pre means that it prevents seeds from germinating. So it's a great thing because it means less time in summer pulling weeds. If you can get them get the product into the ground now. And I believe from my experience, I haven't read any articles that confirm this, but I believe that there's kind of a cumulative effect. So if you use it once a year, every year, you get kind of a buildup in the soil, and so there's not much coming up. I mean, this weekend, or this week I was out doing some pruning and I saw some little patches here of weeds, spurge, that wonderful ground cover that's really difficult to get out. I sprayed it, there's only a handful of spots, so it tells me that I think the pre-emergent is working, but if you don't continue with the process, the weeds will come back. There are such a thing as perennial weeds, and they're really tenacious and they're difficult to get rid of, so that's a good product. And this new pre-emergent Michelle mentioned, I haven't tried that yet. It's a new product to us. We seem to think it might be better. I'm going to give it a try. We don't have a track record with it. We really depend on you folks to tell us about your experience with the product. Is it successful in this circumstance, in this kind of setting?
And usually with the pre-emergent, we put it down twice. Usually January, February, it goes down. And then also in June, right before the monsoons hit, if you can get that down before they hit, that'll keep all that stuff from coming up again in the summertime.
So 3 or 4 times a year, this is what you want to use. It's an all-purpose fertilizer. It's slow release. It's an organic product. Doesn't have any chemicals. Got bird droppings and so on. I toss it about everywhere. There are directions here on how many ounces per tree trunk thickness and that sort of thing. I tell you, I don't want to do mathematics in my garage. I just go out with a bucket and if it's a big tree, it gets 4 handfuls, a shrub gets 3, etc. You get the picture. The plants get fertilized several times a year. Even now is a good time because we're always feeding for the next growing climate. The next climate coming around is springtime, of course. We want healthy flowers, big trees, etc. So this is a good thing. And for this, one word of caution about this product, and we have a variation on it, be sure that you don't allow any animals like your dog to get into this and eat it. It's not a problem if they lick it and sniff it in the yard, but if you use half the bag and leave it open, guess what could happen? We did have, dogs that have been known to eat this and get kind of sick. It's not chemical, but I mean, it's too much of a good thing. So especially for this, we have a fruit and vegetable version that's got bone meal and calcium in it. And when dogs come here, they stop and sniff this, so we know that they like it. Just a word of caution. I keep my fertilizer, if I have any unused fertilizer, in the bucket with a tight plastic lid so that no animals can get into it.
And what I would just say is that if you do have a dog that likes to sniff around their plants, water it in, or take a small little rake and just kind of work it in. That way everybody's safe. The thing with this fruit and vegetable, it's great for your fruit trees, your vegetable garden, because it does have that 6% or 7% calcium. You can actually use this on your whole yard. That calcium is your gypsum element that helps break up clay. So you can use it, either one of them is great, but you can use for your vegetable gardens. This helps with your blossom end rot, when you get that black spot on the bottom of your tomatoes, when your squash kind of start out nice and gorgeous and then they kind of shrivel up at the ends, they get blossom end rot, and that's what that is.
This product is intended to keep moles and gophers away. It's a deterrent. It's a repellent. Some people have success with it. But as I mentioned, we have everything. This is sort of the one end of the scale, and at the other end of the scale, we have something that's almost like the atomic bomb for gophers. So we have nests you can put around a root ball. We have little smoke bombs you can use. I have a friend who has his own smoke bomb device, and he puts a highway flare in a bucket and turns on the fan and pumps that into the tunnels. And as I say, we have a whole class on deterring animals. Ken Lane is great on that, and somebody actually came in here recently and said, I have all these gophers and they're kind of destroying my yard, and I wish they wouldn't do that, but I don't want to hurt them. Okay, well, I mean, do you want the yard or not? Because if you believe in catch and release, what it means for gophers and moles is sort of that catch and return. Because they're going to come back, they're going to find that you're sort of a sissy and you're not going to do anything. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have a product that's kind of it's a device that you can push into the ground and find the tunnels, and then you can pull a handle and you can release pellets. These will kill them, and they'll be underground. You won't have to deal with a carcass like a trap or your dog digging it out and bringing it to your back door. They're going to die underground in the tunnel where they belong, and so your yard can thrive. So just, and by the way, all of our classes are eventually archived, and they're available on YouTube videos. So let's say you go home and you realize you've got these mounds and tunnels you want to read up on gophers, and it's going to be a while before we have the gopher class. You could just look for it in the Waters YouTube videos, and you can find a class about gophers, fruit trees, whatever it might be. It's there. We have archived, literally hundreds of classes on all topics related to gardening.
For those of you that have fruit trees, they're still dormant right now. Now's a great time to get the dormant oil on. Basically, this is a mineral oil that will coat the tree. It'll kill, basically it suffocates any aphids, thrips, anything that's living on that tree. Can't see it, you won't see it until they start messing with it. So if you put this on now, it will help relieve some of that pressure. You'll still get some, but you won't get as many. Also, those of you that have apple trees, you always get that brown spot in the middle. It's basically a coddling moth. They lay their eggs in the flower of the apple, and that's actually the larvae coming out and not something going in. So once your tree starts flowering, you hang up a trap. This is it's basically a little cloth tent that has a pheromone in it. So this will attract them. If you have small trees, this will actually take care of the coddling moth issue, because they'll be attracted to it. Usually you'll get rid of most of them. But if you have a larger tree, or you have several trees, you'll definitely want to, once you start seeing them in the trap, that's when you know that it's time to start spraying. So when you spray your flowers, you wait until the petals start dropping. Once that happens, then you can spray the dormant oil onto the flowers, and that'll kill it. Basically, it suffocates the eggs that are on the flower itself.
Here we have another product here. This is called multi-purpose insect control. And the sad reality is that chances are we're going to have, all of us, have insects in our yard, aphids, thrips, mites, spider mites, whatever it might be. They're going to be in your yard. And you can, pick them off by hand or introduce ladybugs or try and hose them off, or maybe you've got homemade remedies. Those may work, they may not. It's your choice. But this spray here will kill 100 different kinds of insects. So sometimes folks come in here and they say, well, look, there's some bugs on my roses, what do I do? And they insist, well, I have to know exactly what it is. So we have a microscope that projects on a computer screen, and you can get a better idea of what's on there. They could be aphids. Aphids are pretty common. This is a concentrate, so you mix it if you want to use that. I know some folks believe in integrated pest management, and I'll tolerate a certain amount of loss and so on. It's all your choice. But this spray works well. It's something that you can spray on your roses, your shrubs, because sooner or later, most likely, in the springtime, we're going to have aphids, or we're going to have beetles, or we're going to have whatever. Grasshoppers. It kind of varies from year to year. One year, black beetles are a big deal. Next year, grasshoppers come along, and we have a whole other product for grasshoppers that's pretty neat. It's called Nolobait, and it's a product. It's sort of a powdery product. You put it out there, the grasshoppers eat it, and they start to slowly break down. They can't digest. They get sick, and then the other grasshoppers eat them because they're cannibalistic, and they get this disease. And then if the eggs are born, hatched, they get the disease, and pretty soon grasshoppers are gone from your yard, hopefully before they've eaten everything in your yard. But it's kind of an organic way to work on grasshoppers, which try spraying grasshoppers. You spray it and it flies 10 feet away. So anyway, we're always happy to bring in a cutting, and it can be whether you think it's bugs or something fungal, or your tree doesn't look healthy. There's always somebody here that can help you take a look at that, try to figure out what's going on. Oftentimes, if we see aphids or some other bug, we'll say, try spraying if you're okay with spraying.
His question was, since he has a water feature, and he was worried about it running off into the water feature. Basically, this is a pyrethrin, which is a synthetic crushed chrysanthemum. Just because of the fish, I'd be careful with it. It shouldn't hurt it, but I don't know for sure. So I wouldn't spray it right in that area.
Well, this opens up a whole other area of soil testing. And for most of us, we talked about just soil testing, and most likely you're going to find that you have alkaline soil. Her question, though, is that she's got something else going on with soil. Nothing will grow in there. And that means most likely it needs to be checked for more than just the pH. And if you go over to the Cooperative Extension, they have free pH testing. But if you want to go further than that, they can give you a list of places that can test for other elements. And you can send off, I think one of them is Texas A&M University, relatively inexpensive, fairly accurate, and they're used to dealing with alkaline soil. So I would say the first thing is to test your soil and see what it's like. And so anytime you have some issue and the ground is suspect, the thing to do would be to get a soil test. Start out with a pH, move on to other more specific identifications if you need to do that.
Yeah. So this product is a bug killer. So what we would suggest is that you spray it at night when they're not flying around. It's a contact killer. So if you spray a bee, yes, they're going to die. Most of the things that we're spraying are you're trying to get underneath the leaves and that type of thing. So just be careful with it. There are a good time and a bad time to spray. You don't want the wind blowing. You want it very, very calm. And you want to do it when the bees and butterflies aren't around.
There's the lack of them out there.
And that's an environmental problem. It's not just confined to Chino Valley, it's nationwide. And it's something we're trying to create with our butterfly gardens, our milkweeds. I mean, we're all trying to create this great environment. And if enough of us do it, we will succeed. Let's go to show and tell. We got all sorts of cool pics.
This is one of my favorite little plants. It's called coral bells, or heuchera. And it's, for those of us that have a little bit of shade in our yard, this is a good choice. It likes the shade, and it will fill out slowly and spread out, and it sends out these little shoots with tiny little flowers, delicate flowers. They're really nice, and they come in several colors. You see all this range of colors that we have here. These are all coral bells. Now, one thing I would caution you about, last summer,
Aren't those pretty?
there was a lady who came in and I showed her these, lime green coral bells. She said, those are really beautiful. And you know what the problem is? My grandchildren pick some of those leaves and try and put them in a salad. So you've got to be careful about what's in the yard. But this is a good shade-loving plant. And as you can see, it goes for everywhere from, this lime green to dark. And you could do a nice mix and match.
Right, and this is all about the leaf color. I mean, the flowers are really pretty. They're really delicate little bells, but this is all about the foliage.
Do they do well in a pot?
Yes, they do. Her question was, do they do well in a pot? They do. Again, you'll need that afternoon shade, so it'd be perfect.
So, guess what they have here, other than just a pile of dirt in a pot? Right? This is actually a peony plant, and these are really desirable, prized plants. They've been around for thousands of years. People pay big bucks for cut flowers to be flown to a wedding or some whatever event, or a mitzvah, whatever you might have, and they're just starting to come out. And I can tell you that people have been asking for them. People are really passionate about these, and they're beautiful plants. They need a little bit of shade. Once they get established in your yard, they'll do really well. And there's a long history. It isn't something that was just hybridized last year and suddenly is the latest thing.
The peonies, they need a little bit of afternoon shade, but they can tolerate a good deal of sun. If you can just get those last few hours of hot sunshine, so it's shaded in that hot sunshine, it'll be good. We also have right now, roses are in. This is a dormant rose, so there's no leaves, ready to go. It's in a fiber pot. All you have to do is, you can either take the fiber pot off, or if you just cut a hole on the bottom and take that bottom piece out, you can actually just set this in the ground and plant around it. The fiber will decompose into the soil. But we have a lot of them right now. They're $29.99. They are. This is a great price. We get a truck of 800 roses that come in the end of April, and they'll be full, green, blooming, and everything. But they're going to be a lot more expensive than that because they're full and green.
Another plant that does really well around here are lilacs, and you may see them around town. And lilacs are beautiful. They have beautiful blooms in the springtime, but when that's done, you just have a shrub. You don't have any more flowers until there's a new version of lilacs came along, and they're called bloomerangs. Isn't that a clever name? Some folks are able to get these to bloom 2 or 3 times in the course of the year. So you may get a spring bloom and midsummer bloom, late summer bloom. You have to kind of work on them, but they're a little bit different. They're not as tall, not as many shades of colors available, but you get more flowers more frequently.
And the trick with these guys is that once they bloom, you cut them back. You take all that spent wood, all the flowers off, you fertilize, you get them ready for, just like you would do in the spring. So every time they bloom, you cut them back and get them started again. This is a magical gold forsythia. This one is the 5-foot size range. Or they usually open up with just bright yellow flowers and then the leaves come afterwards. We also have a variety that's in that 3-foot range as well, so we have a size that'll fit your landscape.
Another thing that we talk about a lot is scheduling in the garden. So you see that these forsythias are getting ready to flower, and the lilacs aren't too far behind. And there are other flowers that are early spring flowering plants. So it's nice to have your yard set up so you've got something that's going on at all different times of the year, all the way to the end of the season. Like in September, the pampas grass sends out those wonderful shoots, so you have that when things are kind of slowing down in the garden. So rather than have everything, in April and May is a proliferation of flowers and everything, nice to have something going on all year round, and we can help you with that and going through cycles. When we give the roses, you grow them, deadhead them, they have cycles, they put out all kinds of flowers and they rest for a little bit. So knowing when plants flower is also helpful to building your garden.
For those of you that have containers, pansies do really well in this colder weather. Usually we get them in the fall and early spring. These guys will continue blooming until the heat cracks up towards the mid to end of May. So these are great to fill in your pots, give you some early springtime color. If it snows, they don't mind, just brush it off. They'll smile for you and show their perky little heads later. Yes, ma'am?
You're talking about containers, and with the extremes of heat and cold, are there ones that are less resistant? Will they crack? Or what should we be using?
So her questions were about pots and containers and about cracking in our elements. So because we have that fluctuation of temperatures, unless you get a good well-fired pot, it will crack. If you like the look of terracotta, it'll last a few years, but eventually it's just going to break up and crumble away. The pots that we sell are specially fired. It's special clay, so it will withstand our element. So they will not crack, and you'll be able to enjoy them for years and years on end.
Back to the pansies. I remember a couple of years ago, I always have pansies out in front of my house, and we had a snowstorm. There's about 3 inches of snow on my pots of pansies, and the neighbor came by and said, too bad about your pansies, Doug, and this snowstorm and everything. And, I didn't have the heart to tell him, don't worry about it. I just nodded and said, okay. Well, guess what? The next day, the snow had melted, watered the pansies, they were out flowering, they looked up at the sky and said, thank you, I like a good snowstorm. So, they will handle a snowstorm. They have to over with is if it gets really hot. Then they start to go to seed, but by then, we usually have so many summer flowers that I'm ready to swap them out and do summer flowers. But pansies, Javelina do like pansies, and they came and visited mine. It took them quite a few years to discover them, but once they found them, they either ate them or just dug them up and tossed them aside. But that's life. It's gardening here.
All right, we've mentioned a couple of times, now's a great time for fruit trees. This guy just came off the truck yesterday. For those of you that have a smaller yard and can only get one apple tree, this one will be the one for you. There are actually 4 different apples on this tree. So you get a Red Delicious, you get a Fuji, you get a Golden Delicious, and what's the other one? A Gala. So there are 4 different apples on this tree. So it basically will pollinate each other, and you are ready to go. This one will get in that 12-15 foot range. You treat it just like a regular apple tree. So you harvest and eat happily. It's a 4-in-1 apple.
Yeah,
And
I heard that those that have been spliced in, but after a certain amount of time, does the main one take it over?
they've been doing, his question was about the grafting of apples. And they have been doing this for a while, and originally it started out that way, but I think they've pretty much made it so it doesn't happen.
So one thing, Michelle, that you want to be careful of if you've got a tree like this, and this is your Granny Smith apple, you don't want to just chop all of that off when you're getting a little carried away with a bunch of pruning, because that might be the Granny Smith part of the tree, so be careful about that. And if that isn't good enough, Michelle, tell us about this isn't just apples.
I can't pull that one over, but this is the coolest thing.
Right here.
Basically, it looks just like this, but it actually has a peach, an apricot, a plum, and a nectarine in it. So it's actually called the fruit salad, which is a great name, you know. But I'm really excited about that. Unfortunately, we only got 4, and one of them sold yesterday, so I only have 3 left. But hopefully. But it's a really great tree. We're really excited about it. We did kind of mention the fruit trees, and I do have a whole bunch back here. If you guys are shopping today and you don't see what you're looking for, let us know, because like Doug said, we do have that whole parking lot back there that we haven't got put away yet. So we might be able to find one for you.
And a lot of times people ask about dwarf fruit trees, miniatures, and right behind me here I have a miniature peach tree. I should say that everybody wants a dwarf, there just don't seem to be that many available. Michelle, you do some of the ordering, you ask for them, and they aren't always there.
This pixie is one of the true dwarfs that we actually get quite often. It's one of the more notable varieties. So he'll actually get about 6 foot tall and about 5 feet wide. So he is a true dwarf tree. The one thing about the true dwarfs, they don't tend to live as long, which is one of the drawbacks of it, but it'll get you probably 10, 15 years. Let's see. We talk about seasons. This is the Mediterranean heath. This is also another shady plant, so it needs some afternoon shade. They bloom really well right now, gorgeous. And then they're this evergreen, and they have the little evergreen leaves that you get the rest of the year.
What is that called?
A Mediterranean heath.
Heath.
Heath. Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the end of our presentation, but we're open for questions either as with a group or individually afterwards. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
It does. Once we open this all up, that patch, I'm sorry. Her question was, does it attract bees? Yes. That patch yesterday was just all you heard was this buzz that going on back there. So yes, they do attract bees. I would not put it next to your front door.
But to follow up on your question, most plants that have flowers are going to have bees, maybe some more than others. But sometimes folks come in and say, I want a beautiful flowering plant and no bees. Not sure that such a thing exists, and the plant wouldn't exist without the bees. So it's kind of a tough thing. In general, I think that most of the time the bees that are on the plants are so busy working that they're not going to bother you if you don't bother them. Now, hornets and wasps and yellow jackets, that's another story, but usually bees are, I'd say, fairly benign. But I understand people have allergies and they're concerned about that. But when you come in here, usually you'll see in the springtime and the summer a lot of bees or not so many bees on a plant, and you can just make your choice based on that, your observation. How big does the question is, how big will the fruit salad tree get? And 15?
I would say probably 15 feet. The thing with the fruit trees is they are very trimmable. So once they get to a certain size, you can definitely contain them. But like Doug mentioned before, you want to be careful when you start cutting back. Yes.
What do you think of the concept of the square foot garden for this particular area?
His question was about the square foot garden, and to be honest, I'm not that familiar with it. It was a big thing in Colorado about 4 or 5 years ago, but it just seemed like a whole lot of work. I didn't want to do that.
When do you cut your roses down and how short do you cut them?
Her question was about roses. You want to answer that?
Okay, roses should be pruned in March, and if they are mature roses, you can cut them way back. Now, last winter, before I pruned my roses, I looked at a video I found online somewhere about someone that was at a rose farm, and he demonstrated pruning of roses. And he started out with, okay, you see here, cut these down so they don't come up in your face. And when he was done, there were probably a dozen canes. It looked like the skeleton, looked like the frame of a house. He said, don't worry about it, don't be bashful. Your roses want this kind of pruning, they will benefit from it. And there are whole videos on how to do it, which you take out dead disease, crossing canes, etc. But it's not real complicated, but I would say wait till March and then really have at it.
Earlier you were talking about the vegetables and the different types there. How do you know what's cool vegetables and not vegetables? You were talking about vegetables.
Okay, so the question is about cool weather and warm season vegetables. The guide can be what we have here. So in the next several weeks, as it gets warmer, we'll have the summer vegetables. And then usually around September is when the leafy greens start to come in. So we won't have anything available that is not supposed to be planted then.
Okay, and then the second question that I have is, are you familiar with the tree of heaven that's been like infiltrating areas? It's really hard to get rid of. It's what was it, a Japanese elm or something like that? That's
Yes.
just invasive. It's going crazy.
Okay.
Cut it down, you end up with the
Looks like
runners
that.
going
Sounds
All right,
out.
so her question is about the tree of heaven, which I think is a type of elm. And yes, I am familiar with it. And in some neighborhoods, especially around Prescott, their elm trees, Siberian elm, tree of heaven, and other trees are extremely invasive. So my suggestion is don't plant one. You won't find any here.
Trying to figure out how to get rid of it. It's in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had it.
It's not easy. I mean, I've heard people say I cut it down, then I went to the stump and I drilled holes and put designated types of poison to get rid of the stump, and shoots keep coming up. It's a struggle. I mean, that's part of gardening all over the world. Some species come in, they invade, they try and take over. We're trying to get rid of them. Not that easy. I don't know if we have any classes in that, but probably not. But a friend of mine moved into the neighborhood, and one of the neighbors came over to meet him and said, would you like to chip into the fund that we have to keep the Siberian elms going? And this guy worked at the cooperative extension, he was a gardener, and he said, are you kidding? No, I want to get rid of it. So it wasn't a good start to the neighborhood. Being friendly with the neighbors. Why would you have a fund to propagate Siberian elms when most people are trying to get rid of it? So, yes, sir.
Gardenias, will they grow here in the ground or in a pot?
His question was about gardenias and will they grow here in the ground or in a pot? Yes, they will. We get a couple of different varieties, but they are one that actually they will do better in a pot because they're one of those acid-loving plants. With potting soil, you can kind of keep that acid level, lower. But they do like shade in the afternoon. I think we're ready to wrap it up. If you guys have any more questions, Doug and I will be around. Please don't hesitate to come up to us and let us know.